Welcome to Prose Cons, a podcast by writers for writers, brought to you by Precipice Fiction. Precipice Fiction would like to acknowledge the people of the Eora and Durag nations as the original custodians and storytellers of the land this podcast was created on.
Hello, listeners and watchers, depending on how you are consuming this. This is Prose and Cons, the podcast for authors, where sometimes we feel like prose and sometimes we feel like cons. My name is Alex Eldridge. I will be our host for today, and I also have Ali Burnham.
Hello.
Paddy Boylan.
Hello.
Matan Elul.
Hi.
And James Healy.
Hello.
Cool. So today is a little bit of a different one. It's still generally the same format, but what I was thinking of last night as we were deciding what specific topic we wanted to come up with and talk about on this was the tendency for writing these days to follow the modes and formulas of screenwriting and writing for scripts and movies. So having someone who has in fact written a movie that is produced on Netflix on Sound, go watch it, it's fantastic. I thought we might have some, a little bit of a good back and forth to be able to discuss how well these techniques flow into writing. So, but before we dive into that, let's find out what everyone has been consuming. I'll start with you, Paddy.
I haven't been on this podcast for ages, man. This has been like 5 or 6 weeks that I've been away, but I'm back. My sabbatical is over. I'm finishing up Hilary Mantel's incredible Wolf Hall trilogy. Oh man, have you actually finished it, Ali?
Yeah,
and Matan?
I have. Yeah.
I haven't.
Yeah. It's getting.
Yeah.
I think you said something about this, Matan. It's getting shorter and shorter, and I'm gonna miss it. I almost don't want to finish it because I want all of that Thomas Cromwell to be in my life for the next 10 years.
I'm not ready.
There forever.
Yeah, but I know his time is growing short. Spoilers if you don't know the history of the Tudors.
Like a good tragedy.
Yeah, that's been an absolute joy. On a personal note, this isn't something I'm reading, but so I'm living in New Zealand now, and I'm part of the New Zealand Writers Association. I recently applied for a mentorship, which is basically you get an experienced writer to help you finish a project. You know, I sent my book in, what kind of scraps I have of that, and I got accepted. So
Ooh.
that's
incredible, Paddy.
Thank you very much.
Great
Haven't
news.
quite started
Nice.
yet, but I'm going to be mentored by the
Awesome.
amazing Judy Moore, who's a writer and editor, and she's going to help me finish my book Sovereignty because it really needs a kick in the pants
Incredible.
to get done. Yeah, I'm
Nice,
really
man.
excited. I'm really, really excited. If nothing else,
That's
it's going to
awesome.
encourage me to actually write. So that's good.
And it'll be so
Awesome, man.
exciting to read
Stuff.
that. I'm excited for Sovereignty to exist.
Yeah, me too.
Thank you
I've
very
already
much.
read
Thank
some
you.
of it, and it is actually amazing, whatever it is. So
I
I'm
appreciate
actually
that.
really legitimately stoked.
I'm a
to-
little
to read the
nervous.
rest of
Thanks. I've definitely felt a little bit of like, oh God, what am I doing? I can't write a novel. So I'm hoping that she can ease me through that a little bit.
Yeah, maybe you can write several, 10,000 word stretches though and cobble them together.
That might be
We'll
one
see.
approach. Yeah.
Matan, what have you been consuming recently?
I've been reading a new book called The Bird and the Nightingale, and I really don't want to butcher the writer's name, Catherine Arding. I'm actually going to Google it because you should always say the right name. The Bear and the Nightingale by Catherine Arden. I just picked it from a bookstore. I love the cover. I love the first page. Long story short, it's fantasy set in a not very distant Eastern Europe, maybe 100 years ago, like Russia, Ukraine. It leans heavily on the folklore of winter and winter personified, which is really cool because I haven't seen much of that. Like winter is a person. It's this dark, imposing entity, which makes sense if you grew up in that part of the world. Winter would be a big part of your life. One thing I really like about it, I'm about 50, 60 pages in, is that there's something flowery about the prose, but it's almost like a children's book written for adults, if that makes sense. which I'm a sucker for.
It sounds like magical
And
realism, right?
Mm.
yeah.
It makes me
I
think that
it
like
does have.
any fantasy that's not medieval almost is magical realism by default.
I guess it is.
Or urban
It's not
fantasy, I
urban.
guess.
Yeah, or urban
Yeah,
fantasy. True, true.
Okay.
but it does have that silent confidence that magical realism does have.
Mhm.
Yeah, great book. Highly recommend it.
Very cool. Awesome. James, what have you been consuming?
I just read a rather short horror story called The Creeper by A.M. Shine. Story about it's a figure that you see 3 times before it kills you. It appears at nighttime. It appears kind of outside your house or your wherever you are. So the characters are trying to like not get caught out in the dark and stuff like this. It's feels kind of like set up for a horror movie. Like it's got very Slender Man vibes and stuff.
Yeah, nice.
It was a little bit trashy, but the setup of the story with the like kind of 3 strikes and you're out kind of dynamic meant that there was always a plot point, as soon as the sun set, basically. So I just ate it in like 2 days. I just couldn't put it
Cool.
down. Really good page turner.
And that's a short story, is it?
No, I think it was a novel. Maybe it felt short because I read it so quickly.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's very
yeah,
cool.
quite simple, but really really good.
No, I love a simple horror trope. That's awesome.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
Ali, what have you been consuming?
I finished a couple things at the moment, so I'm in that wonderful transition period of now picking my next thing. But I got out the other side of Hogwarts Legacy, the
Nice.
game that shall not be named. Yeah, no, look, I loved it. Like non-ironically, like it's been a while since I've played a video game where it was the plot that pulled me through more than the game mechanics. So I kind of want to acknowledge that on this our writing podcast, that I was playing it for character reveals and plot, and I'm like, oh, my boyfriend is sad and needs me, and that being the main driver for me getting to the end of the game. Like it's there's something working there, so I did enjoy it. Also I finished Chainsaw Man season 1, the anime.
Awesome.
Really impressed with that one. Like early on it had a few things about it that annoyed me, but it was an anime that didn't need to go as hard as it did, because I've looked into the manga and the manga was actually kind of cheap and not that sophisticated. But then the anime teams come on board and I don't know where they've gotten their insane budget for it, but they've gone nuts. Like they've just taken a really basic baseline manga and made something really cool, really stylized. It's brimming with attitude. It's really an impressive piece of anime. So that's Chainsaw Man. And then I also got out the other end of Patrick Rothfuss's second novel, The Wise Man's Fear. So I went back and I've reread 1 and 2, Name of the Wind and Wise Man's Fear, just to get across both of them again. Those are one of my touchstone novels, I think, that maybe every 3 or 4 years I'm going to go back and reread them anyway.
Oh my God.
Yeah, I know you're not much of a rereader, Patty.
I've never done it. I've never reread a book.
I've got a few touchstone series like that where just every now and then I'm like, I'm going to go back and just put my toes back in that, remind myself about. And yes, Patrick Rothfuss, 2 books. Well, maybe there'll only ever be 2 books. Is that for me?
Don't tell the internet that.
No, that's not a good idea. Cool. And I have been playing a game, a little indie game from I think they're called Black Salt Studios. It's actually a New Zealander studio, Patty, called Dredge. I don't know if anyone's seen
I
it.
have heard all about this and I really want to play it.
Oh my God.
Yeah, okay.
Oh
no
my
spoilers,
God.
please.
No,
Because
it's look.
Wow.
Okay, so this is a it's like a low key, very relaxing fishing simulator, essentially. Okay.
Did you just say relaxing?
Yeah. So that's the groundwork of this thing, and then kind of glommed onto that is the Lovecraftian nightmare that happens every time the sun goes down. It is just the perfect melding of these 2 concepts. The plot itself is it's pretty skeletal, but that's okay. But like just the ambience, the music, the way the characters are depicted, the way the relationships develop, the way you just go to a new place and like it's a completely different vibe, and like but the map is quite small. It's just, I feel like James in particular would really love this, but every single person here should play it. It's just a phenomenal game. And the ending is insane. Like,
Wait,
I won't ruin it, but it is crazy.
I haven't played it, Alex, but I really want to. But just imagine that other kid games were like secretly Lovecraftian horror, like Animal Crossing. Like you just don't know. You're playing something, you're putting the carrots in the field, and night comes.
And they turn into like super carrot men.
Or Animal Crossing, but then what happened to all the humans? Where are they?
I have a friend who's actually into all those simulation games, like farming simulators, plane simulators. So I feel like he's the right audience to get that trick on.
Yeah.
I might fall for it.
It's just great. I can't praise it highly enough. I really recommend everyone play. And the second thing I've been doing is just watching a lot of the anime Fruits Basket with my girlfriend, which I think I mentioned before, but it is so good, man. It's so good. I'm a really like I love how he's just like it got him. It's
a heartbreaker.
Yeah, it's a shoujo, which is
she picks the wrong one. Spoilers.
What's that?
She picks the wrong one.
She picks the wrong one.
We'll see. No spoilers.
I went for the mouse.
I'm glad someone said it.
No spoilers. I think I know who she's gonna pick, but I'm not happy about it. Anyway, so I've been watching that. It's just a really great character study, honestly. Just really freaking great character study. I've just been absolutely binging that with my girlfriend. It is a shoujo, so I think that's designed for like youngish teenage girls, isn't it?
Yeah.
Is the
that's
genre.
The shoujo quadrant. Yeah,
but like forget that. It's just great. It's just
it's so funny hearing you guys talk about it, because my relationship with Fruits Basket is I don't think it's amazing, but it's also something I couldn't stop watching. Like I started it and had to get to the end as quickly as possible. And then I'm like, this is awful. I fucking hate it. But also I couldn't stop watching. So whatever relationship is with a piece of medium, that's my relationship.
That's funny. That, like, because Liz is just absolutely obsessed with it. My girlfriend's just watched she's read the manga. She has watched the original weird
I've probably got the manga
90s version of the anime, and she's rewatched this. So we're doing it together. So
wow. Yeah.
That's what I've been doing.
It does so many things terribly, and I'm like, how dare it? But also, can't not watch it.
Yeah. Anyway, so that's my vibe. Also, Chainsaw Man, amazing. I was raving about this before, but like very, very modern. It just feels there's something westernized about the character interactions that I can just relate to, and I don't really know how to put my finger on it. It's
incredibly cinematic. They're using cinematic camera techniques that I don't see used in anime often. Like it's as if cinematographers mapped out the storyboard, like how they would shoot it, and then that's how they've drawn it. Like it's just very sophisticated. Yeah,
cool. All right, let us get into the main topic, guys. So speaking of cinematic things, that's actually a perfect segue.
Good segue.
Yeah, thanks, Sally.
I'll take that.
So look, what we're talking about today is essentially filmic techniques being employed in fiction. That's the main gist of what I want to focus on here. Look, we can delve into some screenwriting stuff. I would actually love to talk about a little bit of that, so I'm sure Ali can help us out with that. But yes, the notion of written fiction, employing techniques that are usually used by films. Now, let's just start on one portion of that. So this is sort of the three quadrants that I've sort of got so far. Is A, fast pace, and we'll get into that. B, visual storytelling. And C, mirroring camera choices, specifically in terms of tense or in terms of what was the other thing? In terms of the perspective. Okay, so those are maybe the three things I want to start with. It's going to just be a jumping off point. Let's start with the pace. Okay. So one of the things that I'll throw it out to you guys very soon, but one of the things that I love about that I love to explore in writing is the fact that I have this terrified relationship with my audience that I'm always frightened they're going to get bored of what I'm writing. Okay. So that means I like to convey a lot of information very quickly, and I like to convey it through action. And I feel like that's a very filmic thing. How do you guys feel about that in terms of having like sharp, punchy chapters, for example, that sort of mimic scenes, like having things conveyed through how someone's looks rather than actual internality. These are the sort of things I want to sort of discuss. Ali, I feel like you're probably the place to start here.
No, I think we can have a fun conversation here, because I might position myself a little bit as a devil's advocate. So for those long-time listeners will know, but new listeners, I came from screenwriting first as the craft I studied in and learned, and then decided to train and teach myself how to write a novel. So a lot of my journey with writing prose has been deprogramming a lot of techniques I would naturally employ and learning that they actually don't work in prose. So that's what I can kind of point to in this conversation, I think. While a lot of things I do naturally, so say people read my prose and they tell me it reads like a screenplay, and there are pros to that. Like, I feel like some people are like, oh, the dialogue scenes, you've got like really interesting dialogue scenes, or you've got great action. I get praise for my action a lot. And I'd say maybe my structure as well. Like, I plot, like just tight structure. So those are all like inherited things from my screenplay background. But things that I know my weaknesses are kind of my interiority, characters' thoughts and feelings. My weaknesses are, funny enough, describing the environment and even describing what people look like, because I'm used to that being, someone else's department. Like, I can establish I'll write a sentence with the establishing shot, but I don't go back and revisit what the environment is doing and potentially how that's tied into interiority. So that's all wonderful book techniques that I'm having to learn to do. But so if I end up being a bit of a devil's advocate in that podcast, that could be quite fun, how we can bounce back our different perspectives. So kicking off specifically what you said about pacing, something I learned that, and that I feel books are doing more and more of this, is maybe like narrative threads intertwining and interchanging POVs. So say a screenwriting technique from television is intertwining an A thread, a B thread, and a C thread. And a visual, like a TV watching audience will quite happily accept cutting, like jumping from that storyline, then back to that storyline, we're jumping to that storyline, we're jumping locations, and we're even cutting between maybe even different eras. I've learned that book audiences, it needs to be done with a more delicate hand. Kind of that hard cutting is incredibly jarring in book
less tolerance
as medium. Yeah. So when like an establishing shot, you can communicate era, period, that person in 2 seconds. It's just a shot. All that information is delivered quickly. But as a writer on the page, you might need to take 1 to 2 paragraphs to re-immerse your reader where you are, who you're with, what the tone is, before you can even kick off again. So jumping so quickly, the tolerance isn't there. It's a different expectation of audience. I guess if I had to articulate that, it's I wrote it down because I thought I was able to capture what I thought. The promise of a book is deep immersion. So if you're sitting down with a book, that's an expectation you have of that medium. But with a film, as you were saying, Alex, the visual promise is it'll be a visual feast you will find so engaging, you will never be bored.
Yeah.
And I think those are 2 different promises.
I wonder if that also has something to do with the fact the movie is self-propelling. It's going to happen in front of your face, whether you're paying attention or not. But with a book, you are really the one driving the focus. So suddenly where there's a change, you can start to disengage and think, oh, but I wanted to go back there. Where a movie, it's just going to trudge on and it's going to re-engage you by the fact that it's always happening.
Well, you could argue that of an audiobook as well.
Medium.
Less consensual, yeah.
Yeah.
I was going to say you can argue that of an audiobook as well, that it's just kind of keeps moving. But there's I don't know if I want to say anything more about that.
I guess the nature of an audiobook, you're not going to consume it all in one session. As reader, you can still stop it start it, you have control over that pacing. You don't have control over a movie's pacing. A movie does happen to you. In a way a book doesn't. But I think there is absolutely a modern taste where writers are attempting to mimic. I feel like multiple POVs are more prevalent and are becoming more prevalent. Like, feel free to argue with me, but
I agree with you completely. It's one of the things I love to do. I actually feel a little hemmed in if I have to stick with one character. Like, I was writing a novella recently that I sent to Patty, and one of my main concerns was like, do you think this is problematic? It's in omniscient perspective. Do you think it's a problem that it's moving between these two characters and we're not really sure which is necessarily the main one, or they might be like dual narratives? And Patty, I believe you're like, no, that's fine. That works. This is a technique that people are used to now. Like, it's
yeah. And to me, that there was
um,
actually an interesting twist that happens partway through that definitely makes one of the characters the main character.
Yeah. That was very intentional. And I feel like that's something that draws from, say, I don't know, Game of Thrones. Just to pick a random example,
I'll start by saying that I support the devil's advocate. I think that there's so much authors can learn from movies, but still, I feel like sometimes because we're so saturated with movies and anime and video games, the problem can be is that we only get inspired by movies and then we try to write a book. Because to make a movie is hard. You need resources, you need to networks. It's not just you wake up and you go make a movie. So some people just try to write a book, but if your only inspiration are anime and video games and you haven't really read the kind of books that you want to read, you want to write, you cannot quite copy paste. With that being said, there are a lot of things I think authors can learn from movies, and one of them, and I'm the biggest supporter of that, I think, is structure. Movies don't mess around. They almost, unless you David Finch, they all have a very clear structure and you have to follow it. And I think a lot of books, especially for new writers, if it's your first book, I think a structure can be the crutches that you need to carry you from the beginning to the end. It can help you know what kind of story you want to tell and what are the story beats that you're going to use to tell it. If you look at the structure of most, Ali, correct me if I'm wrong, if we're looking at a typical script for a feature film, it's 110, 120 pages, something like that.
Yeah, that's the LA standard. Yeah.
So if we look at it, I'm holding Save the Cat by Blake Snyder, a rather great book about screenwriting. If we look at the structure according to Save the Cat, we have actually, it looks like 4 acts. I'm holding it for those that will be watching, but it's actually 3. The middle act is bigger than acts 1 and 3, which I think it's very important for the writer to realize, because act 1 is the setup. Act 2, the big act, is where the bulk of the story happens, and act 3 is the point where we resolve the conflicts of the story. And when you write a book, it is so easy to get lost in the world building and the character. And I'm a huge advocate of plot, and I think that plot and structure is something we as authors can draw from screenwriting to help us.
I'm glad you brought that up, because it's been a really long time since I've thought about a story as 3 acts. I feel like maybe if I sat down to crack another short story or a short film, I would think of it in 3 acts. But anything longer than that, feature, series, or novel, it's minimum 4 acts, maybe 8. I'd think of them as the 8 reel sequence. And precisely because what you highlighted there, Matan, is the midpoint is so crucial to a film structure that you almost need to think of your act 2 as the lead up to the midpoint and then the after the midpoint before act 3. So it's almost like act 1, act 2.1, act 2.2, act 3.
So what you were saying, Alex, about there's the tendency to, once we know films and internalize films, write from film, definitely that can be a good thing, because everyone's seen films and we almost like intuitively know how a film is structured. But at the same time, that is that is a constraint and that is a constriction. One of the wonderful things about books is that they're not films. They can, for example, really take their time in things, where a film is like, go, go, go. It's got that pressure to move. You end up like Stanley Kubrick. A book can really sit and meditate. And some of the best parts of books can be those things where a book really captures the feeling of something or an idea deeply because it really takes its time to explore that. So I think that necessarily writing based on imagining a book and imagining a movie and how imagining how a movie moves might strip away a lot of the things that make a book really special. And yeah, there's definitely writers that write like a book. He's the guy that wrote Contest and Hovercar Racer, and he's an Australian. Matthew Riley. His stuff reads like a movie, and he's really good at that.
It feels like an action movie. It's great.
Yeah, but it also, there's something maybe a little hollow about it.
Yeah, I know what you mean. That it feels like there's some. Yeah, it feels there's a formulaicness to it. Just like going from what you said there about books taking their time and stuff. One thing I always remember going through it. There's a book called, I'm sure everyone's heard of it. It's Infinite Jest by David Foster Wallace, and I listened to this as an audiobook, right? And I'm glad I did, because I probably wouldn't have been able to get through it otherwise. However, there's this one scene in it that I remember so vividly because it was so engaging. That is like, basically, to sum it up, there's a school of all these genius prodigy tennis students, like tennis players, right? And they've invented this game, which is like, it's based on tennis where they're like hitting the ball, but it's simultaneously an analog for nuclear war. Like, so there are all these children pretending to be countries and like, and you have to think of like there's all these political, economic elements, and he explains them all so precisely, and it's hilarious. It is like one of the funniest things I've ever read. It's so funny, and you just couldn't do that in a movie. You could maybe show them playing it, but the nuance of what's in it, almost to a fault. I think it's actually almost deliberately over explained, like just to be like for comedy's sake. Like when like a comedian does something and does a bit, and they make a thing, they're like da da da, and they keep doing it, and it kind of goes down a bit and it's not funny, and then suddenly it becomes way funny because they've just gone so far. This is like the equivalent of that, and you just can't do that in a movie. So yeah, I think there is definitely something to be said in terms of doing that.
There's certain like tricks with prose and how metaphors work that also like just can't be repeated. I know I was reading it was a book about Stalingrad. I can't remember which book about Stalingrad it was, but there's a chapter where it's from the German officer's perspective, probably a German general, and they've invaded Russia, and they're just in some house that their army is moving forwards, and the general is just staying in his house for the night, and he's marching back and forwards across the floor with the map spread out on the table, talking about this is the plan, this is the plan, this is the plan. And the whole time he's walking back and forth, the narrative keeps talking about the floorboards creaking underneath his feet, and the chapter ends with a subtle metaphor of that the floorboards wouldn't accept him, if you know what I mean. It was like the hard Russian wood was fighting against his every step kind of thing. And I was like, oh, that is such a good analogy for like the Russian resistance. It was basically about like just the floorboards were representing the Russian resistance, and the German officer with all his talk and his walking back and forth. And I was like, God, that is such a powerful line. And you can't
every now and again you get like a visual metaphor in a movie that's really beautiful, but it's not the same as a book.
Because it kind of hits you in a different way when it's a book. Like if it's a good visual metaphor in a film, it might hit you right away, or it might be something that like you get on the third or fourth viewing. But in a book, you kind of read the line and then you stop, and it just kind of sinks in, and you're like, God damn it, that was beautiful. Love that.
Yeah, I guess if I had to summarize what we're honing in on, it's this, what you're saying about visual storytelling, I think is a boon of modern taste, and all new writers coming through will naturally be looking to tell their story quite visually. But I guess my asterisk is learning not to overdo it. For, in summary, everything we're discussing, they're two different mediums. And if you want to tell a visual story well, we have a word for what that is, and that's a film. Lean into the strength of your medium. If a book does interiority better, you may as well lean into that as a strength of what you're working on. Otherwise, you may end up with a product that is like a book that's halfway towards pretending to be a screenplay, but it's not a screenplay, and then you've got a book that is probably not the best book it could have been. It's that awkward middle ground.
As a contrast to that, I'm thinking of one of my, I guess I'd say it's one of my favorite books. Has anyone read Less Than Zero by Bret Easton Ellis?
No.
So basically what it is, it's about this this very jaded, sort of maybe even depressed, like, kid from about, I think it's 1987. It's set like late 80s, right? And they're in LA, and it's very, very much that LA noir sort of, like, you know, like the parents are all on drugs. It's all very sunshiny, but everyone's so, like, morbid and depressed. But there is virtually zero internality in it. Like it is all literally conveyed through dialogue. There's and there's something, I think he said that he took like the core of the concept from Joan Didion. I haven't read a lot of Joan Didion, so I can't speak to that. But there's something so powerful about the blankness and the spareness of the prose. Like, it's just like, I'd almost like to quote it.
That sounds like Hemingway.
Yeah, there's definitely something Hemingway-esque to it.
This story called Hills Like White Elephants, which is just two people speaking in a train carriage.
Yeah.
And they start talking, you don't know what they're talking about. And through the course of the story, you just start to pick up, like, oh God, this is what they're talking about. I don't want to give it away because it's a spoiler, but the lack of internality almost makes it like a puzzle. And you have to suss out what it is each is thinking by just the words themselves. It's really stark and really powerful.
Hemingway does that quite well, and I was quite similar with For Whom the Bell Tolls, which is just a film about guys camped up in a mountain waiting to blow up a bridge at, like, just the right time. But the main character is like a blank page. But then he's so aware of everyone else and everyone else's social dynamics. It worked really, really well. But again, I think these are probably, I don't know what the phrase would be. They're kind of like fringe cases of, like, something done a certain way. Like, there's definitely something else that those writers are leaning into within the medium.
Yeah.
On the point of, like, pacing, like, I know what I would definitely try to do in, like, my own writing is to set up, like, to come at it from, like, emotion within the character, and that is usually the kind of hook that I try to get people on early on, because I think I'd be a little bit of a slow burn writer in the early stages of a story, but I try to pull that off by having the emotion be quite obvious of what the character is going through, and that generating interest, and then filling in a bit of intrigue before I start to get into the main pace of the story, which I think books do a lot better than a film.
Definitely.
But
Yeah.
that's something I kind of struggle with, because on the one hand, that's one of the advantages that a book has over a movie, is that we get to see inside the mind of characters in a way that a movie can't really do it.
Yes.
But on the other hand, inside thoughts are not action, and they can be a bit tricky, because it's a bit like you can get a bit stuck in the mud if you get the habit of giving too much inside thoughts to everything that's happening, because then no one's really doing anything. They're just thinking about that one thing that happened. And I think a film would be 100% someone doing something, or at least on the screen, and 0% inside thoughts in most traditional films.
Yeah, well, they become Hamlet,
I think. But I think a book can be 50-50, 80-20. I think ideally, and I'm just chucking numbers out here, maybe 70% of your book should be either dialogue or action. I don't think it should have that much inside thoughts. Of course, different genres, different styles.
And potentially the modern audience as well. Like, I feel like our classics, there was a taste for that interiority percentage to be way higher than it is now, probably precisely because of film. I do want to add on to what you were saying, Patty, because that was a really good point about the idea that, for me, the art of the screenplay, and then a useful skill that prose writers could steal in the prose side of this podcast, things that are cool to steal from screenplay, is the fact that the art of the screenplay is inviting the audience into the puzzle of working out what the character feels, why they are doing the things they are doing without access to their thoughts. Like that just that extra engagement with the audience. We see it more in literary genre in books. And I think the example you gave, Alex, is when an author just does the experiment. I'm going to strip this all back. And the whole point of this novel is the intellectual engagement with the audience of, please step in and draw your own assumptions and work out why they're doing what they're doing. For fun, detailed film techniques, because we're robbed of unless we're using voiceover, because we don't have interiority as a tool, the tools we are using are usually sound is the easy one, the music, the soundscape. But even an audience can be clever enough to know when that's too hammy and overdone and the emotion is too strong in the emotion, like we don't want to hear it. Setting and environment and set design, I guess this is why I'm potentially weak on it as the screenwriter, because I'll introduce it once. I'll be like, here's the setting, here's the environment. Now we're moving on to dialogue. But a clever cinematographer, a clever director, the environment and the mood is always there, kind of informing us of character, emotion, and mood. Without having to say it, that's how it's being said. And then what I love is editing as the tool that defines a screenplay. And one of the first things they taught us in film school was the Kozlov effect.
Yeah, I know it as the Kuleshov effect.
Yes, that's probably the better way to pronounce it.
I was actually just thinking of this. I'm like, I'm going to find a way to work this into the conversation.
Yes, this is the juxtaposition of one image against the other and the implied meaning in the space in between. So to explain what the Kozlov effect is, yeah. So it's an experiment, early film editing experiment, where they had a man just staring really intently. So it was just this reaction shot of this man staring. And then they cut away to a bowl of soup being eaten. And then they screened that in front of an audience. And then they say, oh, wow, that actor was really impressive. He looked so hungry in that shot. And then they went away and they had that intense shot of a man staring. And then they cut it to a child's coffin. And then they screened that for an audience. And they're like, wow, that actor was so good. I could see the sadness and how upset he was as he was staring at this
amazing.
Child's coffin. And they just had him cutting away to different things and the audience reading into the meaning of this man's intense expression. So that was kind of the film school uptake of learning the power of editing and understanding the juxtaposition of, you put this image next to this image, therefore what is the meaning you've implied. So I kind of love that as a screenwriter. I'm like a step removed from that art, because a director and editor will ultimately be responsible for that. But I can, as a screenwriter, put all the pieces in place to imply, here's all the images you can play with, here's the order you can play with them, here's a suggested pacing for them, and at least just do that big thinking to get it on the page first for other creatives to go away and play with.
Can I just ask, Ali, like, do you think, like, because obviously everyone was putting their own interpretation onto the guy, right? Like onto what he was doing based on how it was juxtaposed, right? I wonder if it was like, was this guy an actor, or was it just like, if his ability to like stare intensely had been less like effective, I wonder if people would have been like, I didn't get that. What did that mean? Like, how much of that was the actor? And do you know what I mean? Like,
yeah, like
it's a fascinating
I'm not sure.
idea.
Like, we're talking black and white, where very early film was when this experiment was created. So the film is grainy, and I don't think this was an actor giving the performance of a lifetime. It was just more, he had an intense expression. It was taken completely out of context. And just the audience's ability to read into, like, they're solving that puzzle. They're like, what's he thinking? I need to know what he's thinking, what he's feeling. And then it cuts to a coffin, and then an audience goes, he's sad. Like it's them arriving at that conclusion, and there's like a dopamine
two kids' shoes never
association
worn,
with
that sort of thing.
Working it out. Like I love that when I'm watching films, and I fill in the blank space between a character receiving news and then suddenly they're performing an action, and you're like, what are they up to? What are they doing? Why are they doing that? And like that, there's a game of, oh, because of that, oh, they must be pissed. Oh, they're going to be pissed. They're going to do that. Like it feels like there's a meta narrative conversation happening with the audience, and the journey you intentionally take an audience on. When you leave those blanks, when interiority is a blank. So I do love that about film. It is ultimately why I think I don't know, I studied film before I got into books, because that was the part of the art that really drew me to it. And I've had to unlearn a lot of that, because one of the main beta reader feedbacks I get on my writing is, I don't know what the character's thinking at this time. I don't know what he's feeling. And they're feeling robbed of something. So I've had to learn to go away and improve that in my own writing when I'm writing prose. The moment I started thinking of books as more as like simulated ASMR experiences, that really changed my approach to writing prose, just to try and kick myself out of writing a screenplay. I'm like, if screenplay's a blueprint, then books need to be an ASMR experience.
Right. Yeah, that's not a bad frame to think of it from, actually, especially if you really want to delve into the minutiae of like how you're feeling and stuff.
Getting those sensory things on the page that a screenplay doesn't necessarily have to do.
Yeah, I'd like to delve into something else. I think like this might be the final section, but there's something I really, really have been experimenting with lately, and I really would like to get you guys' take on it, and that is perspective. Let's think of the two main tools of perspective in storytelling. Those are tense, and those are literal perspective. Which person? First person, second person, third person. Now, as some of you know, I recently wrote a story that came from second person. It was you. Like describe it, you. And it was a really weird thing to write, but I really liked how it came out. And I want to know if you guys think how this tracks, how these techniques track to the physical filming of something. So, for example, if you're doing something from first person, it's almost like this like shaky handy cam thing of like, you know, well, actually that might be more like, okay, I feel like if you've got this like found footage thing, the closest analog you could think to that would be probably first person present tense, right? Can you guys think of what do you make of that interplay between those perspective tools and how they relate to film? Hopefully that's not too abstruse a question, but do you guys know what I mean?
Yeah, of course. I guess film is almost always, by definition, third person. It sort of has to be. Third person always is, quote unquote, the camera looking down. And thinking about it, another thing that books can do that film can't really is first person perspective. I can't think of any films that are entirely filmed from the point of view of a camera. What's the
Blair Witch is one, isn't it? Like that's pretty much like...
true. Although I think even that different people take up the camera at different times and point it at themselves. Okay. So I guess something books can do is play with perspective, play with tense in a way that films can't.
Yeah, I would argue that the found footage kind of thing almost puts you at a distance.
Yeah,
it feels like you're watching.
Right.
Like it almost reinforces that you're watching something. If you rather than
as opposed to living it, yeah.
Do you think it is the closest equivalent to first person though?
No, I don't think that you can accomplish first person, but I think you can try to get very, very close to the character. I know The Handmaid's Tale was filmed with an awful lot of really boxy shots of the main actress's face.
Yeah.
Which I think is as close as you could probably get to actually being inside the character and hearing their emotions, is just being right there on their face. I think that's the same about as close as you can get. that's what I would say. It's just a close up of the character, and then it being obvious what their emotion is, rather than it being a what are they thinking right now kind of thing.
On perspective and shots, I mean, Alex, maybe this isn't exactly what you wanted to lean toward, but like you can't help but think when comparing films to books, like where the camera is, where is the camera pointed in this scene in a book. Exactly. I mentioned to you guys this just before, but I'm doing some editing at the moment, and I'm editing a lot of works by writers who aren't expert writers yet. And there is a tendency sometimes to focus a lot of attention on the page on something that really doesn't pay off and isn't that important. And the example I've got is this guy, I'm editing this book right now, and he spent an entire paragraph talking about a character's shoes, right? He's laboring on these shoes. How do the shoes look? How they fit on the guy, how he's wearing them, the sound they make on the ground. And it doesn't actually go anywhere. The shoes aren't important to the story. The shoes don't really tell us anything about the person. They don't actually inform the plot. And the example I gave him in feedback was, imagine you're watching a film and imagine that the camera focused on this person's shoes as he walks into the room. You'd be thinking comment. Like, that's interesting. Why are we looking at the shoes?
Why are we watching the shoes?
Yeah, and if there's no payoff,
look at those buckles.
Like, what the hell was that scene?
Is that silver?
So I think something that can be really useful sometimes in writing, especially if you're still like kind of an amateur, like all of us are, is imagine what the camera's doing, and imagine if this was a film, what would the camera work be saying? What would the words on the page translate to as the camera focusing on?
Yeah, Patty's kind of perfectly summed up how I would have responded to that. So all scripts are written third person present tense. So the idea of trying to communicate camera shots by changing that, like, you may as well looked me dead in the eye and told me you had 3 heads. Like, I'm just like, dissonance. I can't, what? But what Patty's saying is that within third person present tense, the techniques we use to imply what camera like what shot we think the cinematographer would use is sentence length, and how many words on the page, exactly as you said, Patty. Like, if I'm spending 2 sentences describing a vase, I'm telling the director and cinematographer this is probably a close-up and a lingering shot on this vase. It's feckin' important. But if I'm just going sentence, outside, lights, sky, bird, like I'm implying a fast montage. I'm implying quick shots. If it's just I'm describing the outside of a building, like it's just, this is the 2-second establishing shot in a sitcom, just so we know where we are. Like, so there's how many words I put on a visual almost directly correlates to what I'm suggesting how long that shot should be. And the detail in that sentence implies whether it's really close. Am I describing how many individual hairs he has in his mustache? That's an extreme close-up. But if he's just kind of walked into the room and he's a bit of a shadowy figure in the doorway, I've implied a long shot. Like, so like those are the techniques at my disposal.
I really like the way you both put it, but especially Patty, what you said about just imagine that this is a movie and shoot the camera, spend 6 seconds showing us exactly how that person is dressed. I think it's a great comment for writers. And it's just about finding the balance. A movie is on one extreme, and a book can be anywhere, really. It can be close to a movie, it can be very far from it. One example is Wolf Hall. Wolf Hall, even though there's a lot of descriptions, I never felt like I'm listening. It's gonna sound weird. I never felt like I'm listening to an inner speech by the main character. I felt like I'm just watching it through his eyes, and everything is colored by his biases. I never felt like he's talking to me and tell me, so this is what I think about this guy, this is what I think about that guy. I just felt like I'm presented with the world through his eyes. I thought that was a good way to put it without it feeling overbearing.
There's a book that would be difficult to turn into a film. That would be incredibly challenging.
They tried. They made a BBC show. I had a crack at it.
I liked it. Very adapted though. I mean, I think the book as it's told, I don't know how you'd make that into a film.
I don't know if you can. I don't know if you should. You can. I don't know if you should.
Cool. All right. Well, look, I think we might wrap it up there then, frankly. Paddy, do you want to take us away with the quote there?
I do. This is a quote by the legendary Jordan Peele, writer, comedian, filmmaker extraordinaire. If you haven't seen Key and Peele, watch it. So good. Jordan Peele says, "That's my advice when dealing with writer's block. Follow the fun. If you aren't having fun, you are doing it wrong." And that's very reassuring from Jordan
Sage
Peele.
words.
Sage words. Thank you,
Or a
Peele.
little terrifying, because what if you stop having fun? You know?
Yeah,
Then you're
my
doing it
rewriting's
wrong.
been awful lately. Maybe that's a
Yeah.
bad sign.
Lean,
You can take it.
lean the other way. If
Yeah.
you're not having
Lean the
fun,
other way.
lean the other way.
Cool. All right, guys. Well, look, this has been Pros and Cons. Thank you, Ali, for mashing the old devil's avocado into some unholy guacamole. I was literally waiting.
I'm
all show to
sorry,
say
and you're
that,
welcome.
so- No. This is good though. This is good. It's always fascinating to hear everyone's take on how you're going to transplant one medium from the other to the other, and it doesn't always work, but we do what we can. To wrap up, guys, if you could, listeners, give us a review on your respective platform. That really helps us get this podcast out there and get it to writers who might be struggling a little bit to find a community or to improve their prose. And this might be just like the little push that they need. So we would really appreciate if you could do that. Maybe give it a share too.
Amen.
But yeah, that is pretty much it. We will see you guys next week.
See you then.
Bye-bye.
You're listening to Pros and Cons, the Precipice Fiction podcast.